So coming up this weekend is going to be UFC 309, headlined by the return of Jon Jones, taking on the return of Stipe Miocic. I think that this card, honestly, does have some potential to be one of the best cards of the year, even though it is very top-heavy with that main event and co-main event being significantly better than the rest of the card, in my opinion. But I still do think that this really could be a very good UFC pay-per-view event. And speaking of good events, I thought that last week was a pretty good one. UFC Vegas 100. For me personally, it was a great one. I did get a perfect prediction card, which is the first time I've managed to do that for the UFC. It took me 3 years, but we finally got there, and I'm very happy about that. So hopefully we can use some of that momentum into this card, but I think that this might be a pretty tricky one to predict. I do have quite a few plans this weekend in general over my summer break to upload more videos, and I am hoping to get a Cage Warriors 180 and KSW 100 prediction video out there on my YouTube channel this week, but I'm not going to make any total promises on that just because I am actually starting my first week of work in the engineering industry, because I am currently studying for a civil engineering degree at a university, and I start a new job tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. I might be pretty busy, but we'll see how it goes, and hopefully that can happen. But I will have articles out on the WeWantPicks.com website. Of course, WeWantPicks.com is where you can get a lot of extra content from me, where I do write articles about KSW, Cage Warriors, LFA, you name it, I'll probably put it up there, as well as where you get a lot of access from Angelo and Jacob's bets, where you can get access to the safety parlay, the line tracker as well, which they use, and stuff like that. We don't have the 3-day free trial anymore. I have explained a couple of times why we had to get rid of that, but you do get a 10% off discount to any membership, whether that's 1 month, 1 year, or lifetime. And you do significantly help support my channel as well. So if you do sign up for that, it's 1 month for $9 using my code, and you're going to get a lot of cards worth of value there. Now, let's now get into UFC 309. I know it was another long intro, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. Let's talk about the first fight here. Veronica now fights against Eduarda Moura. I'm going to pick Eduarda Moura. Now, this might just be me being a little bit delusional, because I was very, very high on Eduarda Moura at one point. She very impressed me in her UFC debut. Great English, but she really impressed me in her UFC debut against Montserrat Ruiz, and also on the Contender Series as well, where she defeated Jhonata Silva, really using that wrestling. And then she just recently come up short against Diniz Gomes. Now, to be fair, I probably am happy that Diniz Gomes did win that fight, because Eduarda Moura was missing weight very consistently at 115 pounds, and you just can't have that. So now that she moves up to 125, I think that she can still be a force at this weight class as well, because she is pretty big. She was huge for 115, and I think that the weight difference or the size difference isn't going to be that massive at 125 in general, especially against Veronica Hardy. Now, Veronica Hardy, of course, a lot of people do know that she has made some rapid improvements in her career, was taking very long breaks, and eventually did come back after dealing with quite a few injuries. I think one of them was very major. I thought it was something to do with concussions, which is quite crazy, and she's come back and she's defeated quite a few opponents, and it's looked very good doing it. Her technique on the feet has looked impressive, her grappling has looked impressive, but I am going to side with Eduarda Moura here. As I did say, I was very high on her at one point. I still am very high at her at one point, and I think that the move to 125 is going to be very good, and I think she can close the distance, get the takedowns on Veronica Hardy, be very heavy on top, and win with control and grappling and just ground and pound. She's got pretty good ground and pound, so there is some concerns. I mean, of course, her cardio is terrible, but at 125, maybe it's not going to be so bad. I'm going to go with Moura. I think she can win the first 2 rounds in the wrestling and the grappling. She's still going to be the bigger girl in here, even though going up 1 weight class too. So I think that we can see Moura go out there, chase her down, and end up getting a takedown. Now we have Oban Elliot fighting against Bassil Hafez. And one fight that I really looked into was actually Bassil Hafez's most recent matchup against McGhee Gall. Now, this is a good fight to reference for quite a few reasons, to be honest with you, and it's because McGhee Gall is also happening to fight on this card too. But Bassil Hafez is fighting now against Oban Elliot, and he did not look like the same guy that fought against Jack Della Maddalena on short notice quite a few months prior. Now, there could be a few reasons for that. Of course, JDM was very severely drained going into that fight. He had to cut weight multiple times and then accepted the short notice Bassil Hafez fight. And Bassil Hafez is just a massive guy for 170 pounds. He really is. And although he doesn't have the best striking, he is just a very physically imposing guy with pressure forward movements and with pretty good takedowns and control on top. And of course, we did get to see that in that Jack Della Maddalena fight. But then he fought against Gall, and he did beat Gall. But it wasn't really the most impressive performance, and especially when you do consider how good he looked against JDM before that, despite the loss, it was a little bit disappointing. He now fights against Oban Elliot, and Oban Elliot is a guy that I have been very critical of in his UFC run, and in fact, I might be willing to say that I think I have picked all but one of his fights incorrectly. I'm 1-2 on Oban Elliot fights right now because I picked Kike Brito to win. I still think that Kike Brito won this fight. I think I'm on an island, but maybe that's just cope. And then I did, of course, pick him to beat Val Woodburn because it's Val Woodburn. But then I thought that Preston Parsons was going to beat him. And I thought he looked really good against Preston Parsons. Now, Preston Parsons isn't going to shock the world or anything at 170 pounds, but he has shown so far to be a pretty good test for quite decent up-and-coming guys. And I think that you can draw some parallels to Preston Parsons and Bassil Hafez. And I thought that Oban Elliot, really just kind of only being a pure wrestler, dealt quite well with the striking. And honestly, coming into this matchup against Bassil Hafez, Oban Elliott's a pretty big guy at this weight class as well at 170 pounds. And I think against Bassil Hafez, I think he's going to have the better cardio as well. That is one thing that has failed Bassil way in the past. He has slowed down quite a bit going into fights if he can't get an early finish. And I think that Oban Elliot has shown that he's a tough guy. I mean, on the feet, this guy took a lot of damage against Kike Brito, who I think is a better striker than Bassil Hafez. And then also in the grappling, Preston Parsons was pushing him a little bit, even though it was just a good performance overall for him, I thought. I'm picking Oban Elliot. Low confidence pick. I mean, I don't pick Oban Elliot very often. I have picked him against him twice now, and he's won 3 times in the UFC and Contender Series. But I do think against Bassil Hafez, he can go out there. I think he can defend quite a few takedowns, get some top control, and just overall, I wasn't that impressed by Hafez's opponent in fight against Gall, I should say. And speaking of Gall, here he is. We've found him. He's fighting now against Ramiz Brahimaj, and it is a miracle that this guy still is in the UFC, because I don't know what his recent record is, but I thought he was 1-5, but it turns out he had a win in 2019. Nonetheless, he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. One of those wins going against Jordan Williams, who had a decent run. I mean, he did hurt Ian Gary at some point, which I think was kind of crazy. Am I thinking of the right guy, or have I just exposed myself in front of the world? Nonetheless, Gall, we know what he does. He is a grappler, just like Ramiz Brahimaj. Except the thing about Ramiz Brahimaj is that he really is just round 1 or bust. Almost all of his wins have happened in the first round by submission. In fact, I almost would be willing to say they all have but one. And then aside from that, he just went out there recently after taking 2 years away due to injuries. I would have to assume that's why he took the 2 years away. And against Themba Gorimbo, he looked terrible. Themba Gorimbo was a guy at 170 who has started to make some serious waves, but with Gorimbo just beat him up kind of everywhere. Brahimaj looked like he had absolutely nothing to offer. And now he goes in there against Gall, who I just said had a relatively close performance against Bassil Hafez. And I think that, you can draw, once again, some parallels between Bassil Hafez and Ramiz Brahimaj in the fact that they are dangerous grapplers. Gall was able to hold his own there, and I do think that he can defeat Ramiz Brahimaj here. Is this the same guy I was thinking of? It was when he fought Ian Gary. Okay, here we go. I think that Gall does beat Ramiz Brahimaj. I think Ramiz Brahimaj has shown so far in his career that he really is just round 1 sub or bust. You need to not forget about his UFC debut, where his ear literally nearly fell off. I believe it was Max Griffin that did that. It was terrible. The fight, of course, went past the first round and he got smoked. Caught McGhee, smoked him, because that fight, of course, left the first round. And then Themba Gorimbo was able to do the same thing as well. I think that Gall, despite losing multiple times now in the UFC recently, I think he still does have some serious skill set there. And I think it is, well, win or go home for both of these guys. And it might even be win and go home, depending on who it is that wins. I'm going to go with Gall. He's a slight favourite. Tapology's picked against him. But I do think he can get it done. Once again, just another low confidence pick to really start off this card. Now we have Marcin Tybura fighting against Jhonata Diniz. And if I am not mistaken, Marcin Tybura is the underdog. But I will very quickly try and bring that up for you guys. I like Marcin Tybura in this matchup. It is a short notice fight. I did actually have Derek Lewis to defeat Jhonata Diniz in what I believe is probably described as the original matchup. And then they have rebooked Diniz to fight against Tybura on this card. But just looking at the odds, Tybura is currently plus 105. I like Tybura. I think he's got a much more well-rounded skill set. Jhonata Diniz, of course, as we know, is a former Glory kickboxer. He did compete at a pretty high level as well in Glory, as he has fought against some pretty top guys. And I will go through here. He did fight the legend Rico Verhoeven in 2013 in one of the first Glory events. And then since then, it's been a very long time competing in the kickboxing world. Coming to the UFC after knocking out a bunch of guys in the first round. And the first thing that I personally really noticed about him is that he is quite slow. This guy, I mean, when he fought against Carl Williams would throw and land a 1-2, and then he would back up and react, you know? And then even then, he went to war against Neves, but that didn't last long because Neves is short and eats a lot of pies. Austin Lane, kind of the same thing as Diniz, actually, just kind of a guy that just doesn't exit the pocket ever. So any heavyweight with any power at all can knock out Austin Lane, which is why he did that. We haven't seen takedown defense out of Diniz because Carl Williams, for some reason, just refused to shoot takedowns, and he blamed that on something else. It was kind of a big situation, but I don't know if Diniz has any good takedown defense. We don't know this, and one thing we know against Marcin Tybura is that he will shoot takedowns. Tybura is a wrestler, and he is a guy that has fought some very good competition. He fought and stepped up against Tom Aspinall, and before that he was on a pretty decent win streak. Came back and defeated Taito Ivasa, which was just tragic. And I do think overall we can see Marcin Tybura go out there and take down Jhonata Diniz, who's we just don't know at all how good his takedown defense is. If he chooses to strike with Diniz, I think he is going to be at a striking disadvantage, though, as Diniz is a very powerful guy, former Glory kickboxer, but he is slow to react. I was picking Derek Lewis to knock out Jhonata Diniz because if Carl Williams can land a 1-2 on you, then so can Derek Lewis, and Derek Lewis's is going to hurt a lot more. I think in this one, though, it's a wrestling advantage for Tybura. I think he can wrestle Jhonata Diniz, and I think that he can get it done. I think you could even draw similarities. I'm loving that terminology this video, it seems, to Taito Ivasa and Jhonata Diniz, and I think that Tybura can get the takedown, and I think from there it really could be easy work for Tybura, whether or not he wears down Diniz and gasses out his cardio for a round or two, or finds the submission on top or ground and pound. Jim Miller returns now against Damon Jackson at 155 pounds. Damon Jackson choosing to move up a weight class to lightweight after finding very mixed success at 145. I think that you can probably point at an exact moment where Damon Jackson's career started to go severely downhill, and it was when he knocked out Pat Sabatini. Now, I know it might sound very weird to say that the point of his career going very sharply downhill was with a win, but it's because when he knocked out Pat Sabatini, all of a sudden Damon Jackson thought that he could strike. And I'll spoil it for you guys, Damon Jackson can't strike. And that was proven against Dan Ige, where he just didn't really shoot any takedowns and just accepted defeat by striking willingly with a pretty good boxer in Dan Ige for 2 rounds and just let Dan Ige box him up for 9 minutes straight. It was probably a display of some of the worst fight IQ of all time. The same sort of thing happened against Billy Q, but he did attempt some takedowns there, and he did attempt some takedowns against Hernandez. And then once again, against Chippy Mariscal, he just takes a beating because Chippy Mariscal, pretty good kickboxer, if I'm not mistaken, is, or at least was, on the National American Kickboxing team. Not a bad striker, not a guy you want to just willingly strike against when you have no striking. But Damon Jackson, he is a very solid grappler overall, and I do think that is where he is going to find most of his success in a fight like this. But the problem is, he's also fighting a very good grappler in Jim Miller, but unlike Jim Miller, unlike Damon Jackson, Jim Miller has been striking a lot more because he has been finding a lot of success with his hands and actually does have pretty decent boxing. Now, he took a beating against Bobby Green, and honestly, in hindsight, not a good matchup for Jim Miller to take. And that was just kind of a tough one to see because Bobby Green did just beat him up for 15 minutes, and it was pretty brutal. And now he's coming back 6 months later against Damon Jackson, another older fighter, to be fair, but a guy that I think that moving up to 155 pounds can bring a pretty decent skill set to the table. It just comes down to whether or not he's going to have the fight IQ to grapple. Now, I guess a lot of people would say that it would be dumb for Damon Jackson to grapple against Jim Miller, but I don't really think it will be. I think that he can find success with the top control, with the wrestling. Even every now and then, maybe Damon Jackson can throw a couple of punches, but I will be crying while watching the fight in this chair if he does refuse to wrestle. I'm picking Damon Jackson with a very low confidence. Honestly, wouldn't recommend betting this fight at all. I think Miller does have a very good shot, and it seems like the majority of the public does agree as well. Now we move up. Chris Weidman fights against Eryk Anders. I am going to pick Eryk Anders, and I thought that I was going to see him as an underdog here because I am seeing a lot of people picking Chris Weidman, whether that is in the We Want Picks Discord, whether that is on Twitter, whether that's just in general on Tapology as well. I see a lot of people on the Chris Weidman side, but I like Eryk Anders, and I have quite a few reasons to like Eryk Anders here, and I think that a big one is something that he revealed in an interview recently, and that is the fact that Eryk Anders is now sober. So shout out to Eryk Anders. Must have been a very difficult experience to try and get off whatever it was that he was on. I don't think it was revealed, but Eryk Anders was not sober for a very large proportion of his recent fighting career. And now he has managed to become sober, and I think that is going to honestly just be a very big plus in his career so far. Now, the thing about Eryk Anders, I believe personally that he doesn't really bring like an insane skill set to the table. Eryk Anders, he is a very good grappler, has been competing in those grappling matches just before, but for the most part, Eryk Anders is just a very pressure forward heavyweight that likes to clinch, is very strong in the clinch as well, and it kind of is just like Marc-Andre Barriault, I guess. And Marc-Andre Barriault has not been finding success recently, so maybe that's not a good comparison. But I do think in this matchup against Chris Weidman, he should be able to beat Chris Weidman. You know, I know that Chris Weidman just beat Bruno Silva, but he beat Bruno Silva by trying to gouge his eyes out for 15 minutes. And even then, Bruno Silva just lost to Ismail Nadeyev, who was 1-2, fighting for UAE Warriors or Brave before he come over to the UFC. Oh man, I picked Bruno Silva in that fight too. But nonetheless, I think the thing about Chris Weidman is he is coming back from that terrible leg injury, which is, I mean, a lot of respect for him to come back from that situation. But even though he was gouging the eyes out of Bruno Silva, I didn't think that he looked that great in that fight, and he made the return against Brad Tavares. I didn't think he looked that great in that fight, and Brad Tavares I thought looked even worse. He looked terrible. I think with Eryk Anders, Eryk Anders, I don't think he's done just yet. I think that he's kind of got enough left to clinch against Chris Weidman. I know Weidman is the All-American, or Chris Weidman is a legendary wrestler, but I think at this point, I can kind of just trust on Eryk Anders to keep the fight upright up against the clinch, close the distance a bit and land his punches and bunches up against the cage. I think it could be very boring. It is a middleweight fight after all. And I think that he should be able to defeat Chris Weidman in this matchup by decision. So, once again, a lot of people on Weidman. Me, I'm not on Weidman. I'm picking Eryk Anders. So I'm picking a lot of favorites that are not the public pick, which is interesting. Then we move up to Jonathan Martinez fighting against Marcus McGhee. Could be the same situation because I am picking Marcus McGhee. And just like that, he is a slight favorite, but not in the court of the public opinion. I do like McGhee in this matchup, man. And I know that Martinez is a very dangerous guy and he is a bit of a savage himself. Marcus McGhee, he is just a guy that popped up on the radar out of nowhere. And he's just been sky's the limit since. I actually first started hearing about Marcus McGhee. It must have been an LFA card where he fought against Luciano Ramos. And Luciano Ramos, I'm like 99% sure, is part of Nate Diaz's camp. And the whole time, he was just kind of like, he was just like being like a mini Nate Diaz. I don't really know how to explain it, but that was a very interesting kind of experience to see. And then actually from there, very soon after, he was actually signed to the UFC on that short notice where he got that very impressive win over Journey Newsom. And since then, kind of been all up. Just beat up Gaston Bolaños by knocking him out. I believe he landed a spinning kick, which set up the finish as well in that matchup, which was kind of crazy. McGhee is massive for this weight class. He is a huge bantamweight, and he uses that size very well. He's a very forward pressuring sort of striker. He can wrestle offensively and he can grapple offensively, but we don't really see that all that often. And I do feel like now that he's in the UFC, we have seen him start to make improvements in his game as well. And now he takes on Jonathan Martinez, who himself is a pretty decent prospect, but in my opinion, has actually been losing some fights that I think he's been getting the decision against. I thought he lost to Said Nurmagomedov. I will say that. And then the win against Adrian Yanez, and it is what it is. Yanez, that win, it looks good now, but I mean, at one point it didn't look that good, as Yanez was losing quite a few times after really making a quick come up in his own right. And then he lost to Aldo. He just froze in front of Aldo. He even said that himself in an interview, that he was just so starstruck by the fact that he was fighting against Jose Aldo, that he just stood there and let Aldo kind of do his own thing, and he just never really fought back, which does make sense if you are fighting someone like Jose Aldo. But I think in this matchup, we got a massive bantamweight who can do it all, where I think Jonathan Martinez really only does have the Muay Thai. And the thing about Martinez is he does have very good leg kicks, but I think McGhee, he's a big guy. I think he can stalk Martinez, pressure him backwards. You want to pressure backwards a kicker, so you want Martinez moving backwards. That's what McGhee's going to do. I think that he's going to land very good shots in his own right. I think he can close the distance, have Martinez moving backwards, work the clinch, work some takedowns if necessary as well. And I think that McGhee is going to go out there and get this one done. I think he does win the fight. And now we can move up to the main card of UFC 309, and this is where my picks start to get a lot more confident. And we're going to start off with Mauricio Ruffy fighting against Hafez Llontop, who has accepted the fight on short notice here, replacing Charlie Campbell, who is a boxer with a lot of KO power that really would have tested Ruffy, I feel like, on the feet. But now we have the replacement, and honestly, I think it's just a really good fight for Mauricio Ruffy to just kind of put his name out there and really like become the next fighting nerds guy to keep your eye out on, because he had such a successful UFC debut. And I personally think, I'll be honest, that maybe he's getting a little bit overrated from that performance against Jamie Mullarkey, because at this point, anyone can KO Jamie Mullarkey, but he did look really good, man. He rocked Jamie Mullarkey all over the place, ended up finishing it with the flying knee, but before that knocked him down like 2 or 3 times. Very good performance, and a lot of people are kind of looking at him as a guy that really has a similar fighting style and a stance similar to prime Conor McGregor, because of his karate sort of stance where he's kind of crouched down with the one leg out way in front of the other. And I know that a lot of people are super high on him. I'm not sold on him just yet. And I don't know if a win over Hafez Llontop is going to do it, but I do think that he is a prospect at a very stacked 155-pound weight class that you need to keep an eye out on. He is a striker, for the most part, all of his wins, except for a couple of first-round KO wins. And against Raimond Magomedaliev, he did showcase very good defensive grappling in his Contender Series matchup at 170 pounds. Hafez Llontop, he's a striker, and that's it. He doesn't really offer much more, and he especially offers no grappling at all. We have seen that actually in more than one fight, even against Butchev. We saw that he had no grappling, and we saw that he had no grappling against Padilla too. So, yeah, we've got to worry a little bit maybe about that. Like, maybe Ruffy could find a submission, which would be insane to think it could happen. I mean, honestly, that I think that Ruffy is going to get a first-round KO. I think he's just going to kind of get a big finish here against a guy that I think he is levels above. And I think this is just a situation for him to look good. And that's what a lot of people are expecting to happen as well. Now we move up to Karine Silva, now fighting against Viviane Araujo. Now this is a big step up in competition and a step up in the rankings for Karine Silva. But I do think that this is still a very good matchup for Karine Silva, as I think that she is going to go out there and find a finish over Viviane Araujo, who is now almost 38 years old. I think stylistically it's a pretty good matchup for Silva. I know a lot of people view Araujo as a bit more of a grappler than I do. I personally really only see Araujo as a striker, as a Muay Thai sort of striker. And I think that in a matchup where Araujo is going to want to keep the fight on the feet, and I don't think she can keep the fight on the feet, it's a matchup that is going to be good for Karine Silva. Karine Silva is a finisher, 18 wins, most of them, I think, except maybe all of them, except for one, her most recent fight, of course, have become by finish, which is very, very impressive. You do not see that much at all in women's MMA, really. And the way that she gets it done is with the grappling. She has a very impressive win over Yan Shuhi, which happened quite a few years ago, and since then went on a 4-0 run in the UFC, most of them coming by finish, except for her win over Lipski in the most recent matchup. I think against Viviane Araujo, I think that Karine Silva can get the takedowns against Araujo, and I think she can get the top control and land ground and pound, and maybe find a submission as well. I think that we are going to see a finish out of Karine Silva here. I think it's once again an opportunity for Karine Silva to have a pretty big spotlight put on her, and I think that she really could once again become someone that a lot of people start to get behind, because I think that she is going to find a finish in this fight. So I'm picking Silva by submission, or maybe ground and pound KO. She can get those as well. Now we have Bo Nickal fighting against Paul Craig. Honestly, a massive step up in competition for Bo Nickal, but yet we're still paying the Bo Nickal price tag at -1,000, which I think is kind of crazy and somewhat disrespectful to Paul Craig. Now, I know that Paul Craig's move to 185 pounds hasn't come with the success that I think he wanted it to. I know he did beat Andre Muniz, but since then he lost to Allen and then got KO'd by Caio Borrello, and before that was knocked out by Johnny Walker at 205 pounds. But the thing about Paul Craig is he is good at one thing, and he's only good at one thing. But that one thing could be enough to upset Bo Nickal, and that is that he is good at grappling. His pure BJJ is very solid. He doesn't have any striking, and he doesn't really have any wrestling. But against Bo Nickal, if Bo Nickal decides to go out there and take him down to the ground, which I think is a very real possibility here, Paul Craig is going to be throwing up submissions off his back. He's going to be searching for an armbar, a triangle, and stuff like that. And maybe, in some sort of universe, we see a Paul Craig submission in this matchup. But the thing is, a lot of people are actually predicting Bo Nickal to go up there and just knock out Paul Craig on the feet. And honestly, this could be a situation where we see Bo Nickal go out there and try to kind of use Paul Craig as an opportunity to develop his striking in the high-pressure UFC main card atmosphere. Because although Bo Nickal's striking, I don't think it's that great, he does still have a lot of power. We've seen him knock out Val Woodburn. We've seen him get KOs on the regional scene as well before he did those Contender Series fights. He does have not like great technical boxing, but he does have pretty good striking, and he can throw down if he needs to. I do think that in this matchup, he probably will actually have a striking advantage. Just some people never really develop it, and Paul Craig just hasn't really, unfortunately for him. And even then, even though there is the opportunity for Bo Nickal to win the fight on the feet, I think that there is opportunity for him to win the fight on the ground, because he has shown slick grappling in the past. I thought that he showed really nice grappling against Donovan Beard when he dropped him. He transitioned in multiple positions very quickly to that triangle choke, which ended up winning him that fight. And against Zach Borrego, he operated against the clinch with a lot of speed. And that was what I was most impressed with when he was coming up, was the speed that he was able to fight. And to be fair, since then, has just kind of worked his way through some of the lower level guys at this weight class. And now I feel like maybe the UFC or him have gone, oh, I'm nearly 29 years old now. I'm kind of getting to that point where once I kind of, a couple of years from now, I'm going to be in the prime of my career. I'm going to be kind of, I guess, maybe too old to be put in that prospect sort of category. Give me a better fighter. Paul Craig is that better fighter. This is a massive step up in competition from Cody Brundage. But I do still think that Bo Nickal passes the test. -1,000 is pretty nuts. I will be honest. Maybe you could just sprinkle something on Paul Craig by sub. I mean, Bo Nickal KO is probably only paying like -200. I mean, if this is the odds, I don't know. But yeah, it's a fun fight. I mean, the odds are nuts. They're insane. I actually think that the odds for this co-main event were between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler are pretty crazy as well. I would not line Michael Chandler +200 in this matchup, or Charles Oliveira -250. Now, there's quite a few things to talk about coming into this fight. It's made on relatively short notice. Now, by short notice, I mean, I think it was announced. I mean, I wouldn't quote me on this, but a few weeks ago, and by a few weeks ago, I mean like 4 weeks ago. So it's not an 8-week camp, unless my memory has just really failed me, and it probably could have, because I have been in exams the last couple of weeks. But I do remember this fight being made not on full camp sort of time, and it was a shock when it happened, because of course Michael Chandler was waiting for Conor McGregor to come out of retirement to fight him, And it never happened. And I believe I still have these videos up on my channel. I actually documented this, saying that Michael Chandler was wasting his time. I think there's a video from about a year ago saying that he was wasting his time. And I think there's another one from about 8 months ago saying he was wasting his time. And he's just given up now. You know, he waited for 2 years after losing to Dustin Poirier. And now he's fighting against Charles Oliveira. And I don't think that that fight's ever going to happen. I don't think Conor McGregor's ever fighting again. I think he's done. You look at his social media, he doesn't need to fight, man. Like, he's a multi-millionaire at this point. He's got everything he needs. There's no reason for him to fight. Whereas other people who may not have multiple millions of dollars and have a family to feed kind of do have some sort of inspiration. That's what both of these guys do have, especially Charles Oliveira, recently married and recently had a son as well, so congratulations to him. And he did recently fight, of course, against Arman Tsarukyan, and honestly, that was a close fight. And I think that you can give that fight to either fighter, and a lot of people disagree with me with that. I did pick Charles Oliveira, and I do think at the time, I really strongly thought that Oliveira should have got the decision. With time, I still think Oliveira should have got the decision, but it is very, very close. It comes down to that third round, but not really going to debate it anymore. Tsarukyan is now getting the title shot against Islam Makhachev, taking place, I believe, this year, but I'm not too sure. Anyway, Charles Oliveira looked bad, I thought, against Arman, though. You know, he was not his aggressive self at all. You know, it kind of looked like the threat of the takedown, maybe from Arman, was sort of holding him back. And Charles Oliveira was just not really throwing as much. And we know that Charles Oliveira is a very aggressive shooter box Muay Thai striker. He likes to move forward, and when he moves forward, he throws his front kicks, he throws his push kicks, he's got very nice leg kicks as well, and he's got his hands very, very high. And when he does throw his punches, they're typically very straight and with a lot of accuracy and power. He didn't really do that against Arman, but we have seen it work very well before, of course, against guys like Beneil Dariush, who he KO'd with a head kick, which was amazing. Even KO'd Michael Chandler in the second round. I think it was actually with a left hook that actually ended up getting it done. But in that first fight, though, let's talk about that while I'm there. I think a lot of people are going to blow it out of proportion. I think a lot of people misremember that fight, because I'm seeing a lot of people saying that it was TNH Chandler. Chandler dominated Charles Oliveira in the first round, and that isn't really true, because Charles Oliveira took the back of Michael Chandler pretty quickly and pretty easily in the first round of their fight, and then Chandler obviously stood up and did the big slam, which was pretty cool. But a lot of people think about the knockdowns that happened, and yes, Chandler knocked down Oliveira and nearly finished him. It was close to a finish, but I don't really think that you can just kind of see a segment of about 40 to 50 seconds being absolute total domination of an entire round. There was still about 4.5 minutes that happened before that, and those 4.5 minutes, I think you can make an argument, were Charles Oliveira's rounds to win before he got knocked down and hurt by Chandler. And then, of course, Oliveira knocked him out, but that's kind of besides the point. Another thing about Chandler as well, that he is looking like he could be in some of the best shape of his entire life, of his entire career, potentially, because you see him on his Instagram and his Twitter, he's lifting weights, he's looking absolutely shredded. Now, a 2-year training camp preparing for an opponent would do that for you, but I am seeing other angles and other interviews and stuff like that when he's not lifting weights and he's not on the Instagram. He looks old, man. Like, this is a guy that's nearly 39. This is a guy that hasn't fought for 2 years now. He's just sat out on the sidelines the entire time, not knowing what he's going to do. Maybe he's been in camp, but then he's left camp and this and that. We don't really know for sure, but I believe Chandler probably would be coming in ready. He seems like the kind of guy that's ready at all times. But stylistically as well in this matchup, I think Chandler's best chance to win is actually to knock out Charles Oliveira. And the way that he would do that is having to close the distance with the hands. I don't see Chandler offensively wrestling here, even though I think that against Conor McGregor, that would have been the best path to victory. Yeah, I think we're going to see a striking fight until Oliveira wants the fight to go down. You got to consider this as well. Chandler's taking this fight after 2 years away. He's probably going to be very aggressive, maybe more aggressive than he has been in the past, to kind of make a statement to try and get that McGregor fight. And you could see that happening in two ways. You could see Chandler going out there and getting the KO over Oliveira, which he's probably really trying to get. Or you could see him closing the distance too much, getting caught by Olives in the strikes, or Olives can clinch him and take him down. And when it gets down to the ground, I think we can all agree that Oliveira is the much better grappler in this fight. And I think you could see an Oliveira submission as well. But I don't know, this might be a contrarian prediction here, but I am going to pick Charles Oliveira by decision. I just look at that Arman Tsarukyan fight, and I do think that he is taking on another wrestler here. Maybe the threat of the takedown isn't necessarily going to be there, but the threat of the striking is going to be there. And Oliveira, he really did look reserved and not willing to be aggressive and open up at all against Tsarukyan. And maybe we see that again against Chandler, but even then, I think that he can still defeat Chandler. I think that the Oliveira that showed up against Tsarukyan can win a decision against Michael Chandler. I think Oliveira can beat Chandler here. I think he can do it on the feet. I think he could do it on the ground, maybe, as well. I mean, well, definitely, if he's on top. If Chandler's on top, I know Olives can throw up subs, but Chandler's got good ground and pound. He's going to hurt Olives if that is the case. But I don't know. I like Olives here. I'm going to pick Olives to win by decision. As I said, a bit of a contrarian pick, but I don't know. I could see this going the distance. I really could. Now we can move up to the main event. Jon Jones fights against Stipe Miocic, the fight that I think nobody has asked for, but it's happening, so let's talk about it. To really talk about Stipe, this is a bit of a negative one. I'm just going to tell you guys, Jon Jones, I think, is going to win this fight, and I think he's going to win by finish, and in fact, I'm probably going to put money on it. Stipe hasn't won a fight since I was in high school. He hasn't won a fight since 2020. He hasn't won a fight in over 4 years. 4 years. And then he fought against Ngannou, got KO'd, I guess half retired, you know, did the firefighting thing, which is very honorable. A lot of respect to Stipe for doing that. That's a great career to follow. But yeah, fought Ngannou, lost. Now he's come back since 2021. So that's cool. Another thing about Stipe as well, can wrestle, can box. Very good boxer, actually. But the thing is about Stipe, we've seen training footage of this guy, and he looks slow. He looks really sluggish. And I feel like someone like Jon Jones can beat an old, sluggish Stipe. Yeah, this is just a fight that Jon Jones should probably win. He probably wins it by finish, and probably in the first 3 rounds, I want to say. Jon Jones himself, on the feet, pretty good rangy striker, but the way that he has been able to really dominate his opponents is just with the wrestling, with the top control, with the ground and pound. You don't really see ground and pound KOs anymore, but he's fighting a 42-year-old man that hasn't won since he was 38, so, you know, that's kind of it. I don't really know what else to say about the fight. I'm kind of curious to see what other predictors say, but I think it's just a Jon Jones win. I cannot predict the guy that hasn't fought for 4 years, and that was my same logic when I did pick the fight against Gall. Because I know that hindsight's 2020, I look like an idiot doing this. I'm pretty sure I actually picked Gall in that fight, and it was just because Jon Jones hasn't fought for 3 years, and I didn't know what he was going to look like, and then he won. But yeah, yes. Jon Jones wins by finish. It is what it is. Honestly, I think Aspinall does beat them both. Let's move on to the cancelled fights. Krylov, I was going to pick Krylov to beat Mirzakhanov. Mirzakhanov is out, and Onama was meant to fight Almeida, and Almeida is out. I am expecting replacement fights for both of these fighters. I'll make videos later on in the week about those. So with that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.